Hi, everyone. Welcome to our AMA, Prepare Your Data for Copilot, Essential Tools and Techniques. My name is F.A. Abugo. I'll be your moderator for the session. I am a technical product marketing manager on the Microsoft 365 Copilot team, and we're excited to speak to topics like oversharing, how to integrate SharePoint Advanced Management, using Microsoft Purview, and also getting into our Copilot deployment blueprint. So thank you everyone for taking the time out of your busy days to join us today. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Erica for introductions of our incredible speakers we have with us today.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Erica Telly. I'm a product marketing manager on the Microsoft Purview product team, and I look after security and governance for Copilot using Microsoft Purview.
Jeremy.
Hi, Jeremy Chapman. I am probably the host of Microsoft Mechanics, if you've seen me before. I'm a director on the Microsoft 365 team, but I also cover all the technical topics across Azure, data and AI, Microsoft 365, Power Platform, and basically any of our commercial products.
Awesome. And Sophie?
Hello, everyone. My name is Sophie Ke, and I'm a product manager on the Purview team, and I focus on how to use Purview to secure and govern your AI.
Incredible. Thank you so much all for joining us today. And with that, we have questions pouring in. So we'll get to the first question for today's session. Okay, first question. Do I have to license my whole organization for Copilot to get SharePoint Advanced Management?
The answer is no. You need to have at least one Copilot license to use SharePoint Advanced Management. And then, that's by design so that you can use it as well as the tools that are included in Purview to analyze and prepare your data for Copilot.
Awesome. Thank you, Erica. Question number 2 from Manaka on Tech Community. What is the difference between M365 Copilot Chat versus M365 Copilot when it comes to user experience, feature limitations for Copilot licensed users versus non-Copilot licensed users?
I can take that because we actually just filmed a show on that yesterday, ironically. So Copilot Chat is a new option basically that has the ability to use web grounding and upload your content into your prompts to be able to reason over those. The nice thing with that is when you do upload content into that prompt, it goes into a OneDrive location that's within your compliance boundary. But it does not have, and this is the difference, it does not have access to the broader Microsoft graph, where, for example, if you use Microsoft 365 Copilot and have that license, and you say, let's say, have a prompt which is, when was the last time I met with FA? What did we talk about? And what did I agree to do? It can go and look through email, your calendar, SharePoint, and those things that are connected to you, and basically give you that information without you having to reference or upload anything. So that's a big difference in terms of the graph grounding versus web grounding, kind of automatic finding the information versus having to upload that information. There are things that you can do with a Microsoft 365 Copilot license, like / and then reference person or file or other entity type there to kind of get it more specific to that piece of information. Then the other part I would say is with agents, one thing that you can do is if you build an agent, you can have the agent, let's say, grounded on SharePoint information, whereas the agent in that case on Copilot Chat, and I'm going to go back to Copilot Chat, the agent is pay-as-you-go, or you can do prepaid messaging pack, which is basically like your Copilot Studio license that we've had until now, up until January 15th. That still exists. Or you can set up a pay-as-you-go billing plan, which basically says for the number of messages that are consumed, and more messages will be consumed if you are doing things like graph lookups or autonomous agent actions, for example, than if you are just doing web grounding or kind of basic, especially if you're doing basic classic agent question answer where it's actually written into the agent logic. those have very little message consumption, 0 to 1 or 2. Whereas if you're doing message consumption against Graph, it's 30 messages or 25 messages for autonomous actions. So those are basically going to accrue based on the number of people that are using the agents that you have in your organization with that billing plan. And then you will get billed basically monthly based on that consumption. So that's different too, because when you have a Copilot license, you basically have included agent activities with grounding that's part of the Microsoft Graph. So you don't have to worry about paying for activities where the agent is doing lookups again against SharePoint or one of those sources, because that's included as part of your Copilot license per user per month.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeremy. And next question, I think this might be a good one for Sophie. How does Microsoft define oversharing? Is it a general term or does it mean something specific?
Yeah, so we do have a very defined definition of what we consider as internal oversharing. And if the producers can show our common causes of Copilot oversharing in SharePoint slide, and we can talk through that. So one of the first common causes of how we define oversharing is setting your site privacy to public. So there are two settings you can have for your SharePoint site, which is private, where only members can access the site, and public. So when you have a site that is set to public, then that means anyone in the organization can access the site, which could cause potential oversharing. The
And I
second
have a
is,
visual for that too,
yeah,
if you want to see what, because I think a lot
for
of people will
sure.
find this pretty familiar. So when you set up a site for the first time going through the user interface, typically you're going to have this privacy settings drop-down option where you're going to pick public or private. Now, the difference between these, obviously, is that if it's public, then you can find it through search. You can get to that site in your organization. But the technical difference behind that actually is what it looks like in terms of the site permissions that you set. So, for example, now that I've set a site to public, what that means is that this everyone except external users is now a site member. So if I turn that site back to private, this group, this site member group goes away. It literally is removed from this dropdown here. So that way, only the people that are part of, in this case, NWB2000 e-bike members would have access as a site member, plus the owners, but the rest of the company in this case would not have access. So it's a critical step there in terms of what you choose, if it's public or private, right when you create your site.
Perfect. Thank you, Jeremy, for that visual. Back to the slide on the common causes, and let's just go through the rest. So the other one, I think, Jeremy, you also have a video, which is the default sharing option. So when we share a document or a file, when you set the default sharing to everyone, instead of picking specific person, you could potentially cause oversharing. So go ahead, Jeremy, if you'd like to share that.
Yeah, so this is an interesting one because I think there are a lot of kind of misperceptions about how this works. So when you're in the SharePoint Admin Center, there are these settings here in terms of the defaults for your sharing links when you create a link or copy a link. And so what happens when you do share a file and you go through the normal sharing process where you do copy the link, that link is basically it's like a ticket. It's like something that needs to be redeemed by the recipient. Now, in terms of redemption, when they go through the normal process, what that looks like then is they've got to actually click on that sharing link before that gets indexed and before they're actually granted access to that file. That means that if you've got links that are out there that have been created but not yet redeemed, then the search mechanism, Copilot, won't be able to discover that file until that link is redeemed. That said, though, there is one caveat, which is when you overshare, and this is kind of a definition of oversharing, you don't use that share path and that share set of ways to share that link. Let's say you have a file that you found and you've got permissions to it as an individual user. You then copy that link and put in a group email with a bunch of people that you didn't share with using the sharing path. And basically that will auto redeem in that email, for example, because all the people on the to line there in that case will be able to see that file. They don't need to redeem that link. So if you're doing this type of sharing, or you're putting share links, for example, in a PowerPoint that a lot of people can get to, or in an email or in a Teams message, if it's especially going to a larger distribution group where it auto redeems, that's one of those cases where you can fall into oversharing with those sharing links.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't understand the auto redeeming part. So yeah, Jeremy, that's a really great point. So the one of the other potential causes of oversharing is broken permission inheritance in your SharePoint site or library, meaning the permission that you've set on a library has broken from the parent, which is the site, meaning that if you update your permission on a site in the future, your library will still have that unique permission, which may cause oversharing in the future. The other one is the use of everyone except external user domain group for your site. And I know, Jeremy, do you have a video on that as well? Yeah, let's go
That
through
was
that.
the one that we just showed, actually,
Oh,
that
okay.
had, that was the
Yeah.
public
Yes,
option.
that's true. When we were talking about setting the site to public. So yes, so that is only available when you have your site set to public. But if you have your set changed to private, that setting will be removed. Other common causes of oversharing, the last one that we define, is when you have your sites and files set without sensitivity labels. So sensitivity labels have settings in them when you apply them either as a default to a site, to a library, or auto apply them based on keyword queries or sensitive information types. They can apply settings to help you prevent oversharing.
And this one, by the way, I think is a good kind of initial way to, for example, set sites that have basically rules around them, that contents that are created in that site will have that label applied to it. Therefore, it can take additional actions based on said label, because you can basically within Purview set up different policies based on the label that's been applied to content, and that label to content can be applied based on its site location or document library affinity with the site that you set. So that's the way I would say a lot of organizations, for example, will set for various departments or teams within their organization, various SharePoint sites effectively with default labels that will maybe be highly confidential or confidential. Then any document that gets created within those different document libraries will have that label applied to them as well, so that they're kind of protected by default.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to kind of summarize this for people new to the issue, so the definition of oversharing is people have access to information beyond what's required for their job. And then what Jeremy and Sophie just went over are the common ways that happens. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you all. And kind of following up on this discussion, next question is, how do sensitivity labels play a role in preventing oversharing? Should we look at managing access or broad sensitivity labels? We often see sensitivity labels causing issues when we work with clients outside of our tenant.
Yeah, so there's really, as you alluded to, two ways you could potentially approach this issue. One would be managing the access to the container, like a SharePoint site or a library. And then the other would be to apply access rules to individual files through a sensitivity label. So what a sensitivity label does is it actually encrypts the document. You can not use it with encryption if you want, but in this case, when we want to manage permissions, we would use the encryption option. And then no matter where that file is moved, if it's downloaded, it's going to check in with your Intra authentication service, make sure that that user account has permission to open and view that file and take any other actions as well, like printing. Now, your question about working with clients outside the tenant. So the reason you're running into that issue is that it's encrypted. And so the clients need the encryption key to unlock and access that file. Jeremy, actually, I'm curious, do you have any tips for how to work with external users and still protect files?
It kind of depends on the situation. One of the things that we actually do, because mechanics is a broader effort with lots of kind of external players as well. So we'll have external guest members effectively in the team, and the team's files are backed by SharePoint. And then they will have access to files with, even if they've got a label on them, because we often are doing kind of first disclosure. So the people that are in that core team, and we protect we obviously don't do a public a defining of the mechanics team, but it's a private team that has a very small group of members and owners, and they are able to basically view those files. So it's protected in that sense that we have kind of a very locked down group, even with external and internal members to it. So that's one thing that we do. But I also do hit that occasionally where one thing that we started doing is that we were default labeling everything as confidential, and basically the person who has the file needs to downgrade label if the label is not accurate, because a lot of times we are, say, we're already public. Like, let's say something's been disclosed or it's generally available, and I'm creating content about that thing. So therefore, because everything that's in that file is now public information, I can downgrade the label to a general label. And those are things that you need to do. Like, if you realize, like, I'm going to send this out to an external party, it is a public now bit of information. I have to get the label into a state that allows it to be viewed by the recipient of that file. Else you need to, as Erica said, get that person who's viewing the file within your boundary of trusted viewers of the file, so that when it does phone home and check to see what the status of the file is and or who's trying to open it, that they can make that check, that the challenge will succeed and the person who should have access has access to the file. Because like Erica said, the real point of oversharing is that only people who need access have access, and oversharing means that you have access to something that you don't need access to at present. Those needs always change and shift based on the department that you work in or the location that you're in. So that's part of the consideration there. But ideally, you want to just have access to just enough information to get your job done, but not additional things.
Awesome. Thank you both. And digging a little bit more into the topic of oversharing, our next question comes from Shannon on Tech Community. Does Microsoft have tools that help you discover overshared data?
Maybe I'll set this up at a high level, and Sophie and Jeremy, you can follow up with some of the details. Really, there's two tools that are available to help. One is SharePoint Advanced Management, which is now included in a Copilot license. And the other one is Microsoft Purview, specifically Data Security Posture Management for AI. SharePoint Advanced Management is really looking at the SharePoint containers and what the permissions are in those containers. And it's looking at things like, do a large amount of people have access to this site? And then what Purview excels in is looking across containers and looking at some more sensitive files specifically, or files that might contain high risk data, regardless of where they live in M365. Sophie, what else would you add to that?
Yeah, I think it would be good to take a look. I think, Jeremy, you have some demos on both. Yeah. Sorry, not this slide, but
I have a couple. I'll start with kind of SharePoint. First, the data access governance reports will give you that kind of overall view, and that's part of SharePoint Advanced Management that, again, you get with one license of Microsoft 365 Copilot. So that will identify some of the sites based on the permissioning, and also give you a couple other additional features, which basically you can not only see who has access to what in terms of kind of the way that we're seeing access to these different document libraries, but in addition to that, you can basically do restricted site access as well if you want to, say, lock down who should have access to a site to just a security group, which is what you're seeing here. And then if you can't do that because you don't have the information, then doing site access reviews and basically having a process to reach out to the site owners, because they're usually in the best position to know if their sites are overshared or they've got stale or other members in, say, the groups that can access their sites. This gives you also the tools to be able to do the site access reviews. And then if we look at data security posture management for AI, which I will try to find.
Yeah, if you can pull that up, we can take a look at the data assessment report. Yeah, thank you, Jeremy.
That one actually gives you a nice overview of data assessment, and more information in terms of sensitivity labels and sensitive items, unique user access, all of those things. So you can really view in to the sites that are potentially overshared, and have basically, you can start to prioritize them based on the importance that you see here. You got HR web, which would be a human resources one, which is a very good candidate typically to look for oversharing, and others that you'll want to prioritize, because you're not going to be able to say, if you've got 10,000 sites, work on all of them simultaneously. So you're going to want to prioritize the ones that have the highest risk for being overshared, and then kind of work through that list until you feel comfortable about your sharing and kind of permissions that you put in place. I think this is probably a good time to almost segue into the oversharing blueprint, because this is almost like a phase 2 conversation in terms of the things that you can do.
Sure.
Yeah, for sure. I just want to say, with this data assessment report, back to Jeremy's demo, I just want to add a few points here. With this data assessment report, you can either run it manually at a routine that works for you, but it will also auto run every week so that you have the data that you can compare to as you move through this. So with the auto run, it picks the top 100 sites that Copilot has recently accessed in the past week. And then for manual, you can select the sites that are meaningful, or as Jeremy mentioned, potentially like HR sites that you want to take a deeper look at. So with all the information in this data assessment report and DSPM for AI, you're able to pinpoint which sites may, have oversharing happening. And then let's take a look, Jeremy, at the blueprint so that we can help you address these oversharing concerns.
Really quick, related to the blueprint. So think about oversharing mitigation as what we've shown you so far is going to mitigate risks at a point in time. And then you're also going to want to have something that looks for risks as they happen on an ongoing basis. So for example, in data security posture management, you could also view a report of prompts and responses that contained sensitive data or data that's unlabeled, as an example, so you can handle things quickly as they come up.
Awesome. I think we're going to bring up there we go.
Yeah, so this is the blueprint that we published around at Ignite, actually, that went live at Ignite to help address internal oversharing concerns when you or your customers are considering to deploy Microsoft 365 Copilot. So we have 3 phases. The first phase is an optional pilot phase, where if you're just getting started and you're not ready to deploy Microsoft 365 Copilot to your entire tenant at this moment, you can consider using the optional pilot phase and RSS, so restricted SharePoint search, to deploy Copilot to that subset of users with up to 100 sites. And then we go into a deploy phase where we help you to deploy Copilot fully to your whole entire organization with tools in SAM and Purview to help you increase site privacy and restrict sensitive info from Copilot access or processing. And then last but not least, like Erica mentioned, we want you to have that continuous improvement of your data security practices to help you further secure your sensitive data and reduce risk and simplify oversight.
Awesome. Thank you for that overview, Sophie. Very helpful. We have our next question coming in from Tech Community. As an admin, can we restrict public Teams creation and also associated SharePoint sites, and just allow users to create private Teams and private SharePoint sites?
Jeremy, do you want to take that one?
I was going to say, Erica, do you want to take it? Because yes, you can.
Yeah,
there are quite a few things that you can do too, but you go ahead, Erica. I'll defer to you.
Yeah, it's been a little while since I've poked around in the Teams Admin Center, but I believe you can set organization policies that have a setting that says by default, is this SharePoint site and the team public and available to everyone in the organization, or is it private by default? Is that correct, Jeremy?
Yeah, so you can set up, and it's kind of it's both. It's kind of more or less a shared setting because Teams is backed by SharePoint for the files side of it. But yes, you can also have it so the teams themselves are managed for chat and the other workloads. there are a couple of things there I would unpack. One, I'm still a big advocate of using Microsoft 365 groups. There are security groups, which are basically only admin built that don't have associated email addresses and don't do provisioning of SharePoint sites and Outlook accounts and those types of things, or M365 groups. I do think you should allow people to create Microsoft 365 groups, else all of the group creation burden is on you as the IT admin. Having been an IT admin for many years, I don't like that. I did directory services for a long time. And if everybody's kind of chasing you down to create groups, that becomes a very arduous task. So I think it does make sense to let people create M365 groups, and then it's kind of up to you if you want them to allow them to create public or private. And I would say even public, you can, I believe you can even reduce the number of people that can create public so that your HR teams that do want a full employee site or the kind of company-wide sites built, that can be done. Then the other part of it, I think that's important, these are kind of the old school SharePoint controls, is like when somebody does a share action against that site, instead of just kind of using the defaults and letting people just blanket share that site to everyone in your organization and creating those kind of share with everyone links, you can also set that up to where the owners of the site have approval of sharing the site itself and the document library, or the contents themselves, instead of just letting people like share it with their peers, their colleagues, where they may not have that same discerning level of protecting disclosure information. So you can control this on a site by site basis, but basically for the ones that you really want to lock down, you're going to want to make sure that owners of site are part of the approval process to approve sharing to other entities or other objects in your directory, as opposed to just letting everyone share them, especially on a sensitive site. And that's going to be at the discretion of contents of the site and priority of the site and all of those things. But those are the two controls. A, if you want to lock down to private. B, within private, there's probably a subset of sites where the sharing of site itself should only be governed by or approved by the owner.
Awesome.
Yeah, and then the other option I'll add is if you want to control the default sharing option so that when your users click that share button, it doesn't default to everyone in the organization. It maybe defaults to everyone that already has access or people you specify. You could enforce that at scale using a site sensitivity label. So if the site is marked as confidential, then the default sharing setting is people who already have access. Just because a lot of people are never going to understand the nuances of security. And so having them do the right thing by default makes it easier for everybody.
Right. Thank you, Erica and Jeremy. Next question from Gloria on Tech Community. Hey, Gloria. Can you explain what data third-party Copilot agents have access to, and how are they able to access and use that data?
I can do my best here. Well, so you can build declarative agents effectively or through Copilot Studio. Agents that have API level access based on permissions of the user who's interacting with that agent. That's the key there, because in the old days, you would have to basically set up, a lot of times in plain text, passwords and permissions to external data sources. I would say, and this is a nice benefit to agents and kind of that entire fabric of building agents, is that we've learned how to do authentication based on user and make sure that we're kind of limiting that to what a user should be allowed to see, and basically piggybacking on top of, say, Microsoft Entra, for example, as an IDP, to be able to say what that person should be able to do. So as you develop the connectors in Power Platform effectively and what their permissions are, you've got full control. Same thing, for example, if you're using Graph, if you're extending the Microsoft Graph and kind of parsing and indexing external sites, you also have full control over who can view those things, all predicated on Microsoft Entra. And then those agent actions, as a partner that's building these things, then you have to basically have a variable that says the user's permission set is only what will be used in order to view that data or write back to that data. Because what you don't want to do, and there are probably ways to work around this or hard code these things, but that's always a developer's bad practice, to hard code permissions into something. That's just fraught with the potential risk of malicious actors, malware, etc. You want to make sure that you're kind of limiting access to that person that's interacting with that session. Therefore, everything that you're writing, building from a API or from a graph grounding perspective, if you've got a variable to go to a SharePoint site or something, is going to be limited to that person who is leveraging or using the agent. So that's the best practice. There are ways around that that aren't recommended to get to data, but you're going to want to in general use, what that user should be able to see whilst using the agent.
Yeah, if you're evaluating the purchase and use of a third-party agent or really any kind of Microsoft 365 app, the key question to ask is, does this use user-based permissions instead of essentially granting that, I'll just say app because I'm more familiar with those, instead of granting that app access to literally everything in the tenant to do its function.
Yeah, and that's a big risk and danger and no is if you do have, let's say, this thing you really want it, but it's badly architected, or you're the dev team internally and you've set up, let's say, an account that has really high permission levels and you're using that account as the context to get to files. That's bad. You don't want to do something like that. I think these are all practices that happened 10, 15 years ago, I think, in terms of especially like macros and things inside of Office. But these are things I think that the developer community, by and large, has stopped doing. So it's going to be, again, you're going to want to predicate that on user permissions, like Erica said, just to make sure that you're covered, because it is literally it's like a matter of time before someone finds out if the permissions are set to, say, a managed identity or something else, or another account that's in your tenant that has over permissioned state. Then that will eventually get detected and probably exploited in some way.
Awesome. Thank you all. Next question from Nikki on Tech Community. When will organizations who have purchased Microsoft 365 Copilot licenses see the SharePoint Advanced Management features in their tenants? And will all the functionality appear simultaneously, or will it be phased in?
Yeah, I was just trying to find a chat with Bill Bayer, who's the product marketing manager for this area. I can't find it right now, so I'm going to try to quote from memory. And this was about 2 weeks ago, so maybe something's changed. I don't know. But right now, you can get, if you have a Copilot license, you can access SharePoint Advanced Management. You have to go in and start a SAM trial is the key word here. And then that's a longer trial than it used to be. I believe it's 90 days now instead of 30, as a way to tie people over and get them access to the tool while we're figuring out the back end kind of commerce stuff to make it automatically included in Copilot. So the answer is all the functionality should be available today. You just have to maybe go about it in a not obvious way of starting the trial. And then it won't be a phased approach. Everything will be available right away.
Great. Thank you, Erica. Next question coming in from X. We mentioned a blueprint. What is that? Where do I find it? And what does it do?
Yeah, so the blueprint, we actually have an AKA link. So let's go ahead and share that on the screen with everyone. So the blueprint can be accessed through this AKA link that will be on the screen in just a moment, aka.ms/ama/copilot/oversharing is the link. And so this blueprint is a guide that we have developed together with the SharePoint team and the Purview team together. And it is meant to help you in your journey. So when you're considering to deploy Microsoft 365 Copilot, or you're in the midst of deploying M365 Copilot, and you're concerned that perhaps oversharing is happening already in your tenant, in your SharePoint sites, this guide is there to help you through the process, the 3 phases that we talked about, the optional pilot phase, the deploy phase, and the operate phase, to help you guide through wherever you are in that process, how to address the potential oversharing that is happening in your tenant. Yeah, anything you want to add there, Erica?
Yeah, so when we made this blueprint, we were very, very careful to edit it throughout the process. And so, we were debating for probably 6 weeks between these 2 teams about what are the things that we recommend people do pre-deployment to identify and mitigate the most risk possible and the biggest risks that would have the most impact, and more importantly, unblock the deployment as fast as possible. And so that's the lens to view this through. I will say it's meant to specifically address the oversharing concern scenario. It won't set you up for like a full recommended data loss prevention or insider risk or governing usage scenario. We're hoping to be able to develop blueprints for those scenarios coming up soon.
Exactly. Stay tuned.
Awesome.
And kind of a very high level observation in terms of the pilot, deploy, and optimize phases. At the pilot phase, like from an actions perspective, as an IT admin, typically you're allowing a subset of sites to be shared. And that was on the visual that Sophie shared a little bit earlier, which is something that you can use restricted SharePoint search, for example, to set up an allow list of up to 100 different sites. And usually when we're talking about oversharing, by the way, we are speaking to SharePoint for the most part. As you know, SharePoint backs Teams, it backs OneDrive, but typically it's a SharePoint thing. No one can view your calendar if they don't have access to your calendar, or your inbox if they don't have access to your inbox. So that's most of the effort is being spent around SharePoint. The restricted SharePoint search is a pretty restrictive thing, though. So, for example, if I'm only allowing like 100 sites and I've got a massive organization with 10,000 sites and I've got people that are in roles that need to work with privileged information, I've got a legal team, I've got an HR team that can benefit from different Copilot actions. While you do get things like the ability to get to your working set of files to be able to access the things that you've already touched, doing RSS or restricted SharePoint search will limit your access in terms of search to net new things. And so it kind of limits the value that you get out of Copilot if, say, you want to use it to help you review or write legal contracts or letters of intent or other things, let's say, for example, as an aid to those different types of activities where it's not in the allowed list of sites. So then the second phase, which is more deploy, is saying, let's get more targeted. Instead of an allow list of up to 100 sites, we can do two things, which is one, I can limit access to information. If you limit access to where you can't reach a file or see the file, search can't find the file, therefore Copilot can't find the file either. And then the other one is let's limit indexing of those files from that container, which is restricted content discovery, which you can do too, that says in a very pinpointed, more block list fashion, I don't want these certain classes of sites to be indexed for search, therefore Copilot won't be able to find them either if I've never touched them. So you can get more dialed in. Because those processes tend to take longer just in terms of the days of work required. That's why it's kind of more in phase two. You kind of start with that allow list approach that's using restricted SharePoint search. You don't want to be on that forever. Then as you work through like your priority sites through the deployment phase to either restrict access or restrict discovery through indexing, you can do all of those actions, set up your labeling, your information protection policies, DLP, et cetera. And then once you're ready, you turn off restricted SharePoint search effectively, and then you've got your data estate kind of under control at that point. The optimized phase is just about kind of steady state and making sure that you don't get back to maybe an over permission state that you were in the beginning of the pilot or the deploy phase, and that basically you've got rules and processes in place to maintain a healthy healthy way to manage data access and permissions in your organization. So you're more regularly using tools like data security posture management for AI or data access governance reports as part of SharePoint Advanced Management, so that you have kind of an ongoing way to continually keep your permissions in an optimized and just enough access state.
Awesome. Appreciate that all. Speaking of DLP, we have a question around setting up data loss prevention policies to protect sensitive data. Is there anything we need to prepare outside of DLP? Are there best practices for those policies?
Yeah, I can definitely take that. So we have just announced DLP for Microsoft 365 Copilot. So what that does is that you can set up now a data loss prevention policy to block processing of certain files with specific sensitivity labels. So what that means is you can either set up a new sensitivity label, for example, do not process, or use an existing sensitivity label like secret or highly confidential. And in that data loss prevention policy, set that and say, if a document is labeled with those specific sensitivity labels, Copilot do not process. And so anything we need to do prepare outside of that, you need to set up obviously your sensitivity label taxonomy and either auto apply that to content or set up by default through the site sensitivity label or library sensitivity label. That way, the files in either your library or your whole site is protected by those sensitivity labels you set, right? Highly confidential or secret. And you can then, the data loss prevention policy will then prevent Copilot from processing those files that you do not want it to process.
And I've
Yeah,
got
go
a
ahead,
visual
Jeremy.
there if you want
Yeah,
to see the visual as
please
well.
do.
So basically, and this is something important when you're setting up your policies for data loss prevention. Sometimes there are certain combinations that you can't do in terms of like different providers on this list where you can't like select everything and then do it. So I'm just going to show you what you do with Microsoft 365 Copilot. So once you've selected that as a location effectively, at that point, kind of like Sophie was saying, you can say, okay, I want to exclude content if it's got a sensitive information type or sensitivity label on it. And if you look at the middle of the screen there, you can see it's looking for SITs that are equal to ABA routing number, credit card number, SWIFT code, US bank account number. So for any messages that are basically going to try to do that through your prompting in Copilot, then this checkbox here says exclude that content from processing in Copilot, meaning that those prompts will fail to go into the Copilot service on input and on output. So you can't do anything that will get blocked effectively as part of using Copilot and its different entry points in your prompt. So that's kind of what. So DLP is basically protecting Copilot itself in kind of the prompt window versus where it normally would protect inside of Exchange or Teams or Word, Excel, PowerPoint, those things. This is protecting in the Copilot kind of user prompting experience.
Yeah, I just want to add, currently our DLP for Microsoft Copilot is based only on sensitivity labels. So we've definitely heard from a lot of customers that you're looking to also block processing from sensitive information types or SITs. So we've definitely heard that. But for now, this specific DLP policy is just only based on sensitivity labels that you've already applied to your Office files in SharePoint. So those files that have been labeled with those sensitivity label will be blocked from Copilot processing, and Copilot won't be able to use those files that have been labeled in their responses.
Yeah,
Awesome.
and just one more thing. If you're interested in DLP more broadly, maybe to look for potential oversharing that's occurring, you can also use it to say, look for people that are sharing with external users or something like that, and send an alert when that happens. And around a best practice for that, definitely start by testing the policy in audit only mode, where it's not really involving the end user or telling them something's happening. You're just getting the alerts to kind of see what would happen if you turned this on. And that gives you an opportunity to test and then tune any false positives, false negatives to make it more usable. And then when you're happy, turn it on. That's probably a best practice there.
Best practice for almost every policy, by the way. Yes.
Yes.
Audit mode is your friend.
Yes, for sure. So there's audit mode, which is simulation mode in DLP, and then there's also detection only mode, which is only giving you the alerts before you turn it on. Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you all. Next question is, can Copilot draw data from a CRM service? If yes, what's the best approach for setting up the proper controls to integrate that? And what if we want to terminate that integration in the future?
I can probably take that. There are two paths to which Copilot could get information from a CRM service. One of them is read-only, and one of them is read-write. So read-only, if you use graph extensions effectively, Microsoft Graph, you give permissions effectively to Graph to be able to index and parse an external location, and there are a couple different things that are kind of easy to do through the admin center in terms of extending Graph. That will give you the ability to see things that are inside of your CRM if you want to do like an account or a user lookup or company lookup or those types of things. You probably want to limit that to basic things that you feel pretty comfortable with in terms of exposing that information. And then the second approach, the second path is if you are using an API and using it as a knowledge source through an agent. So you need something that will basically punch through to the other side of that, to that other app, that other whatever, if it's a SaaS service or app, that can basically pull the data in. And because it's an API, effectively, you can read and write back to that information. And so from an IT perspective, you have full permission over which APIs you allow to be used. You govern the agents, what APIs basically get enumerated as part of agent creation for a maker or an author of an agent. And for the graph index, you also have A, control over what things get indexed, and B, control over the specific users or groups that can use that additional graph index information for reads. So you have a lot of controls there that you can leverage in terms of that CRM system and the information that you want to expose and the information you don't want to expose, whether you want it to read only or read and write. That's all stuff that you can control as an admin.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeremy. Appreciate that.
I'll just add really quick that at Microsoft Ignite, we did announce that Microsoft Purview will also work with the prompts and responses that are generated in use of those types of agents. And so you can use the same set of tools we've been talking about to get the insights into those prompts and responses, as well as those that are in regular Microsoft 365 Copilot.
Yeah, and I will say in data security posture management for AI, or DSPM for AI, not only has the data assessment report that can help you look into potential oversharing that's happening in your tenant, but it also have like Erica was saying, essentially reporting activity explorer that will show you the prompts and responses that is coming through AI. So not just Microsoft 365 Copilot, but also other AI applications as well.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you all. Great answers. Erica?
Oh, so this was for the next question. So we'll go to the next question and then explain this URL.
Sounds good. So the next question is, what about end user readiness? How can we pivot and adjust to meet people where they are at, trying, learning, ideating, and prompting? And a follow-up to that, how do we help users understand what data can be used for their own prompts and what our organization has access to? There's a lot of fear at the moment.
Yeah, so I wasn't clear in my chat to the producer, sorry. So the first thing we'd recommend is taking a look at the Adoption Success Kit, which here's the URL for that. It's aka.ms/Copilot Success Kit. This has a lot of resources around, especially end user adoption, and great tips for how to get executives on board, how to train users to get the most out of Copilot. So that's definitely one resource. Sophie, Jeremy, what else would you add?
Yeah, I would just say the prompts that are part of those different success kits and kind of what to go out. They've got departmental even pivots to like what works well in marketing or sales or engineering or HR, those types of things. So it even gets very targeted based on role, which I think is pretty cool. That way you're not just sending a use Copilot, trust us, it's amazing. It's more like, hey, you're in HR. These are some of the best prompts that you can use right now. And then you basically set up a group usually of champions that are kind of in your org that can help you. And then I would say, to your point earlier, Erica, like your leadership team, getting them on board and also like showing that they're using it and getting value from it. It all kind of, it's going to take, it takes a while sometimes for like the inertia of how people normally do their work. to overcome that and kind of get the value out of things quickly, because it is a change. It's a change in habits. It's a change in how you work, and basically you want to kind of kickstart that habit to be something that people can benefit from on the Copilot side and generative AI, and then find the things that truly do save people time, that are more no-brainer. Like if you're repeating a process, for example, more than a couple times a week or a month, those are ripe kind of things for agents, or for prompts that you can basically say, if I'm writing standard operating procedures for different things every week, I can use last week's one and apply it to a new set of rules, and then create this week's one, and then I can have a way to kind of automate that process. It won't give me maybe the perfect document in the first try, but it's going to give me something that's maybe 80-90% of truth, and then I can go through and edit that and save a ton of time. I do that myself as we're researching and writing things for mechanics. A lot of those, because a lot of topics are like, I'll be doing stuff with, say, Mark Rusinovich, 400 level infrastructure on AI. I don't know a lot of the concepts of like how InfiniBand and various things work. I can use Copilot to kind of do a lot of the research for me and compile a base set of information, and then we distill that down, and then we can use Copilot. Another cool use for agents is to review for completeness of something, to review that document and make sure that we've answered all the questions that someone maybe new to the topic might have. So there's quite a few different things that you can do to really tailor it and kind of help automate repeated processes for you.
And our last question for what's been an incredible session is, how can we monitor AI-related risks to our data?
Sophie, you want to cover DSPM for AI?
Yes. So in Purview, obviously, as you heard, we have DSPM for AI. So it's not just a tool to create policies and manage all your policies, but it's on an ongoing basis. We have tools within it to also detect and monitor, AI risk related to your data. For example, we have, the data assessment tool that you can run on a regular basis to essentially keep track of what is happening in your tenant and how you are addressing these oversharing concerns, and is it improving through time. And then we also have in Purview alert triaging. So for all of those amazing policies you've created, such as the DLP policy for Microsoft 365 Copilot, as well as other ones like IRM, so insider risk management, risky AI usage, we can also triage those alerts that come out of these policies, so that you can proactively manage these potential risks that you have through interacting with AI.
And just to promote the one level above, sorry, does DSPM in general, data security posture management, and AI is one of those kind of workloads for it. That's also looking at your entire Purview managed data estate too. So I would say look at both of them. Look at DSPM and DSPM for AI, because you can actually have it look over a superset of the risk level in your posture over all of your data in your estate that we can look at from a Purview lens to give you basically tips and show you where risk is across your data estate effectively.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
then the last thing I'll just add really quick is, just like you need to have many layers of security to be a secure organization, you also need to have many layers of detecting risk. So within DSPM for AI, there's a recommendations tab where with one click, you can set up the recommended policies for all these things. So you don't have to remember everything we just said. And it'll help you, look for risky AI usage, for example, correlate it together and maybe a pattern of risky behavior. So you don't have to individually look at every alert and other things as well.
Incredible. Thank you so much, everyone. And to close out our session today, we're going to do a bit of a speed round, starting with Erica, then Jeremy, then Sophie. And each of you has 60 seconds to give us your biggest tip for using, integrating Copilot, securing data, etc. You pick, you choose, and we'll start with Erica.
I guess my biggest tip is you'll never be perfect at mitigating every risk in security in general. And so focus on the biggest areas of risk, and especially like more real-time risk, rather than maybe trying to fix the perfect permissions for every single file in your organization. Through some of these tools, you can see what files are actually being used with Copilot and maybe use that as a filter for where to focus.
Thank you. Jeremy?
I gotta say, labels. If I can leave you with one thing, because a lot of organizations haven't started down the path of labels or don't have a good strategy around labels, but basically a lot of the things that you do are going to be predicated on the label that gets either manually or automatically applied to the content based on its contents, I should say. So having a label strategy and making sure that that's in place in terms of protecting files, that's going to get you a long way towards the finish line. And then, like Erica said, the access and permissions management, those you'll never get completely perfect, and I don't think you should ever aspire to get them perfect, because sometimes people will need their level of access plus a little bit to the side in order to be able to get their jobs done. And you're trying to basically strike a balance between usability and security, which is that balance visual we've all seen for the last couple of years. But basically try to get as far as you can. But I think labels and kind of doing whatever you can to automate the protections against files using said labels is what I would recommend as the number one thing.
Awesome. Sophie?
Yeah, for me, it's really about balancing productivity and security. So we all understand everyone needs to do their work and be productive, but we want to balance that with obviously security. So using the right tools, using the right signals. Purview takes a lot of the signals, for example, the sensitive information. So coming from labeling, like Jeremy said, and then from user risk, like Erica said, from insider risk management. So those are all the signals that we can use. So utilize those signals and have that balance between productivity and security.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. And with that, we're going to conclude today's session. Just as a note, this current session and the one before it, Follow the Prompt, can both be watched on demand at aka.ms/TCL/Microsoft 365 Copilot. And for those of you who have more questions, want to gain more insight, our chat will be open through Friday, where our experts will be answering your questions and making sure you get the information you need. So again, Erica, Jeremy, Sophie, thank you. Thank you to everyone who joined today. We appreciate it, and see you next time. Bye.